All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Thursday. It's a short week this week, which is nice. Because tomorrow we get Friday. Any big weekend plans, anybody? What's that? Yeah? Any particular place you want to go or thing you want to see?
The Science World.
The what?
The Science World.
Oh, okay. I've actually never been into Science World. I've been around it, of course,
Really?
but I've never been I've never been in. But I've been to the one in Edmonton, so
Oh, okay.
I'm sure it's not the same, but yeah, that'll be good. Is the weather supposed to be nice?
Not sure.
Don't know. You guys are just like living in the moment, not worried about Saturday or Sunday. It's raining. Boo. It's the last time I asked you about the weather, Victoria. Just teasing. Just teasing. Okay, so let's get going here. Let's hop into where we were yesterday. We were talking about human culture, right? But before we did, we talked about what anthropology was, because part of this class will be anthropological in nature, right? And we said that anthropologists are interested in answering the question that I asked you yesterday, the question of what is a human, right? What does it mean to be a human? And so anthropologists try to answer that from a few different perspectives, from a biological one, from a linguistic one, from a cultural one, and from looking at cultural behavior in the past, right? That's what archaeologists do. And so we said that human culture is really of critical importance to us because, again, we're born with very little internal programming, right? When a little baby is born, they don't know anything, right? They can't walk, they can't talk, they don't know how to feed themselves, they know nothing, right? And we have to teach them pretty much everything, right? For years and years and years. And in fact, here you all are after 17 or 18 years, and we're still teaching you, right? So humans have a very complex operating system, right? And it takes years and years and years to fully download, right? And so that's why we said that, for anthropologists and for us in this course, understanding culture is critically important, because if you don't understand culture, then you don't understand humans, right? Because really almost everything we do is cultural in nature, or if it's not cultural, if it's biological, then we do it in a cultural way, right? We eat in a cultural way, we shelter ourselves from the environment in a cultural way, we reproduce in a cultural way. All of those things have rules around them, right? So we really need to understand human culture, because everything that humans do is cultural. To be a living human is to be a practitioner of culture, right? We defined culture yesterday. We said it was a series of shared beliefs and values and customs. And I showed you this little iceberg graphic that you've probably seen before, right? But it's pretty useful because, again, it shows us some of the things that we regularly think of when we think of, probably more often when we think of other cultures, right? We think of their language or their food or the way they dress or the celebrations or dances or whatever they may have. But, the more complicated parts of culture are kind of hidden. They're below the surface. They're not only things people do, but things people think and believe and understand about the world, right? All of those are kind of very deeply held, and all of them differ between cultures, right? I think I kind of asked you this question yesterday, but maybe I'll ask it again really quickly. Looking at a diagram like this, do you see anything here that you think is different between your culture and Canadian culture that you've seen so far? Any of these kind of ideas? Hey, good morning. I'm looking at attitudes toward elders. I feel like that's one. I feel like in many cultures, people's elders are revered and respected, right? And here in Canada, I feel like we don't have quite that level of respect for older people. I think we love them, right? Especially if they're our grandparents. But I don't think we kind of, hold them in the same respect as other cultures do. Victoria's nodding, so you would agree? Yeah. What else? Anything else kind of jump out to you? Differences between your home culture and this one? What? Tone of voice? Okay, how so? Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny because that's the stereotype I have about Italians, right? They're always kind of they're always like yelling at each other and moving their hands and things like that. But that's kind of not entirely a stereotype, it sounds like. Yeah. Yeah. What's that? It's class? Okay, how so?
In my country, like classes, in the service culture, the service culture. But it depends on which class you are in, what kind of similarly
Okay. It depends on which class you're in?
Yes.
Like what, like in terms of,
High class, middle class, yeah.
right.
It
Yeah.
determines that they reach people like class. How much they earn when you are high class here.
Would you say that it's Hong Kong, right?
Yeah.
Would you say that people in Hong Kong are
Usually it is not rules, like in concept.
okay?
If you don't have the rules, like every class is better or every in concept.
Yeah. There's like a feeling, right? Or people kind of,
Sure,
yeah. Would you say that the classes are more kind of clearly? Do you think people pay attention to them more in Hong Kong?
Because they are disparity of pyramid. So I can't say for sure, but these are one of the concern when you are looking for research.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and that's very true as well, right? Some cultures are very, they have very clear classes and people are very conscious of them. Some, are less so, right? And Canada's not a classless society by any means, but it's not something that has really clear lines, and it's not something we pay a lot of attention to. But I think it definitely exists for sure. Anything else jump out here?
Painful overwork.
Yeah.
That in my home country, employee needs to work for the time.
Yep.
It could say like don't finish work. But in Canada, it doesn't seem that they will have to work for a long time.
Yeah, there's, yeah, like Japan is almost known for their kind of culture of work, right? Where work is very important and there's a lot of social value to working very hard, right? And very long hours. And, here in the West, we used to be a little more like that, but we've kind of moved away to, asking people to pay attention to their work-life balance and things like that, right? So, but yeah, it's true that the sort of the tempo of work, how kind of urgently work needs to get done, whether that work is socially rewarded or whether it's not. yeah, that differs between cultures as well, right? I was thinking about patterns of handling emotions, right? Does your culture encourage you to express your emotions or keep them to yourself, right? And I'm Canadian, but my family kind of comes from the British Isles, so from England and Ireland, and for the most part, the British keep their feelings to themselves, right? They don't make a big fuss about things. They just kind of, restrain themselves, right? Victoria, do you find that Italians are encouraged to express their emotions more? Yeah. Um, what about the rest of you? Would you say your cultures encourage you to express your emotions, or just keep them under control? Under control? Yeah, under control. Yeah. So yeah, that varies, right, around the world. Some cultures are encouraged to express emotions. Some are, it's just keep it under control, right? Lock it up. Anything else? What's that? Oh, the old conceptions of beauty? Yeah. Um, what? How are you thinking about that one? Yeah. Yeah, so yeah, ideas about ideal skin color, right? Ideal kind of body shapes, about um, what else? About hair, um, all kinds of things, right? And if you go back into, now we're living in a much more globalized world, but if you go back, 100 or 200 years, you'll see that there's lots of very interesting concepts of beauty that people in the past used to practice. Here in British Columbia, and I'm not sure if it was this area, it depends on kind of which area of the coast you went to, but hundreds of years ago, some of the indigenous people in this area used to bind the heads of their infants. And so, because what they thought was beautiful was not a round skull, but a longer skull. And so, when their children were infants, they would wrap cloth around the head of this infant, and in some cases put like a wooden board against it, just lightly. But you know how soft the heads of infants are, and they'll kind of grow into whatever shape you provide them. And so when you wrap cloth around them, it causes their online people won't be able to see this. Nobody will be able to see this because I have no markers. Never mind. So, but their heads would actually grow in kind of a more of a cone shape, if you will. And I have some pictures. I should have had them in here, but I didn't think I was going to talk about this. But again, it's a very strange sight for all of us who do not shape our infants' heads, right? We have round heads, right? But of course, indigenous people in the past with their cone heads would have looked at us all and said, ugh, look at all those round heads. That's not very attractive. Whereas we would look at them and say, oh, that's weird. They all have, cone-shaped heads. Bizarre, right? So, yeah, different standards of beauty for sure. Let's see. We said that culture was a tool that humans use, and it teaches us how to interact with the environment and interact with each other. And I asked you why it was important for people to share beliefs and values and customs. And we had some good suggestions about that. Suggestions about it's easier to trust people, right? It's easier to kind of get along in a group if everyone kind of agrees what the values of the group are. And I think really what those things are speaking to is the idea of cooperation, right? Humans are species that don't live alone. We live in big groups, and we need to find a way to cooperate. And so having the same values, having the same idea of what's right and wrong, those things help us to cooperate, right? They help us to trust one another. They help us to, work towards the same types of goals. Right? Now, I wanted to ask you this question today. I wanted to ask you, where do some of these beliefs and values come from? So, here's my premise here. The idea is that whatever culture you live in, whatever part of the world you live in, and really whatever time period you've lived in. So whether you're living here now or whether you lived in, South America 5,000 years ago, all human societies experience some of the same things, right? We all experience the birth of new members, right, of our community. We all experience the death of members of our community. All of us have to find food somehow, right? Whether it's hunting or fishing or farming or just going to save on foods or calling for DoorDash, right? We all have to find food. All of us humans have to do some of the same things, right? But we all have different explanations for those things. And so think about the explanation of what happens when you die, right? There are lots and lots of explanations for what happens when you die, right? Is that just it? It's over? Or is there an afterlife, right? Do you go to some sort of heaven or paradise? Or, if you're late for class or if you're on your phone during class, do you go somewhere else? I'm teasing, but or are you reincarnated, right? Is your spirit or your soul kind of put into another existence or another form of life later on, right? There's all kinds of different explanations for this. And so my kind of question for you here is, why do you think the same events, birth, death, the search for food, whatever, why do you think if we all experience those things, those same things, why do you think different cultures explain them differently? And maybe what I'll do is I'll just give you a couple of minutes to talk amongst yourselves about that idea. Why do you think different cultures explain things differently? The same event, right? Okay. Just talk to the people around you, whether it's beside or behind or wherever you can find someone. I'll just give you a couple of minutes here and try to come up with some ideas about why this might be, okay? Okay, so I know some of you are still talking, but let's hear some ideas here. What do you think? Why? I guess the bigger question here, or the essential question here, is why do we have different cultures at all? Why do humans explain things, the same things, so differently?
But they don't know.
Because they don't know?
They don't know how to explain in the wordings or they don't have a concept of the term, that one.
Okay, so some of the things we're talking about here are things for which you don't really have knowledge, right? Again, when you die, we don't really know what happened. We still don't know what
Or you can
happens.
tell the people who's still alive what happened after you die.
Yeah, yeah. We still don't know what happens. Nobody has come back to tell us, right? So we don't really know. The same thing with birth, right? We understand how conception and births work now, but 1,000 years ago, people had to come up with their own ideas, right? They didn't know about sperms and eggs and fertilization and fallopian tubes and all kinds of things, right? They didn't know about those. What else? Okay. Okay, that's a good one. Yeah. So different environments shape things as well, right? And Kayla here will agree with you, Victoria, that people people live in different places, right? And so they're going to be inspired by the environment that they live in, right? Living in a jungle, if you're a culture that lives in a jungle, that's a totally different experience from living in a desert, right? Or living up in the cold Arctic, right? Or living by the sea or living on the plains, right? Totally different plants, different animals, different weather. Yeah, you're gonna see the world differently depending on where your culture develops, right? What else do you think? Say that one more time. Yeah, so I guess I hadn't really thought of that, but I think that's correct. We're all kind of unique, right? We all think different things, right? We share some of the same beliefs, but we also have some of our own, and we're all kind of uniquely creative, right? And we all kind of are, can invent different things, right? So there's a certain amount of, I guess, individual variability, right? Like you just never know. It's almost like a child, right? If you put them down on the ground with a simple toy, you don't really know what they're going to do with it, right? They're going to use their brain and they're going to interact with it and they're going to do something, but you never really know what's going to happen, right? And so the same thing with humans, right? We're all individually variable, and we may invent all kinds of different explanations for things that we don't understand. That's a good one. What else? What else is there? Individual variability, environment, the fact that people just don't know, right? And they're trying to explain things that are not knowable. Right? Anything else? This is a tough one, but we're doing well. Hmm. Let me see what I had there. Oh, right. So there's probably a couple other things that will influence culture, and there's probably a long, long list. This is a very short one. Environment is definitely a big one, right? And so, again, the type of place that your culture comes from will heavily influence what that culture is like, right? And we'll see that as we go forward over and over again, that the place, the environment that people develop in will influence their culture and their explanations and their beliefs. The way people acquire their food is important as well, right? And so if your culture is a hunter-gatherer culture, right, that you don't farm or you don't keep any animals, you just hunt and fish and gather, well, you're going to see the world differently than someone who makes their living farming, right, or makes their living herding sheep, or makes their living, working at Google and buying their food at Whole Foods or something, right? That's a very different experience, right? Historical events, right? Maybe there's a big flood or a big earthquake, right? Or a storm, or a what? Or a war, yeah. Those things will influence culture's explanations of things as well, as will the influence of other parts of culture, right? So one part of your culture can interact with other parts. A good example of this, and one that connects to food, is anyone familiar with the Bible? Even just a little bit? No Christians here at all? One? Okay. If you read the Bible, not the Old Testament, but if you read the New Testament, basically the New Testament there's a bunch of books in it. Most of it is 4 books that tell the story of the life of Jesus, right? So there's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They all tell their version of the story of the life of Jesus. And in those books, you often see Jesus spoken about in terms of herding terminology, okay? So Jesus will be described as a shepherd, right? Jesus is the shepherd, and the people, the believers, they are his sheep, right? And he often, his believers are referred to as his flock, right? And he's the shepherd of the sheep. And sometimes even Jesus is referred to as the Lamb of God. So God is the shepherd, and Jesus is the sheep, the lamb. And it's kind of a weird metaphor, right? But it's used because at that time and place, when Jesus was around, that was the way that some people made their living. They had herds of sheep, right? And they were moving these sheep through the hills, and the sheep were grazing, and every once in a while the shepherd would sell a few of the sheep to the market and get some money for food and things like that. And so that was a common way that people would have made their living 2,000 years ago, is herding sheep. And so you see that kind of idea brought over and used to describe the relationship between Jesus and his followers, or between God and Jesus himself, right? So yeah, you see lots of that. You'll also see lots of that sometimes when in agricultural communities, when you talk about reproduction of humans, right? We hear about a woman getting pregnant because a man has planted a seed, right? Or is she fertile, right? Just like the ground, right? And you'll hear a lot of agricultural metaphors used to describe human reproduction, and it's because those people are farmers, right? They're very used to farming, and so they take that experience and use it to describe another process, right? And as it turns out, human reproduction is a little bit like farming and also a lot not like farming, but the metaphor can work, right? And so the cultures will use those metaphors to describe things that they don't know, things that they don't understand. But again, we'll try to see more of this, the reason why people think and believe and explain things the way they do as we go forward, okay? So, very quickly, 4 characteristics of culture that I would like us to remember. Okay? 1, that culture is symbolic. 2, culture is learned. 3, culture is integrated. And 4, culture is shared. And I'll give you some examples of each of these so that we understand them, okay? So first, culture is symbolic, okay? So humans are sophisticated creatures in that we use symbols all the time, right? All the time. We communicate with each other in symbolic fashion 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, right? And so here are some symbols, right? Recognize any of those? What's that? Yeah, there's the Nazi symbol. What else? There's a Nike, the check, right? Well, who else is up there? What's that? McDonald's? Where? Oh, Superman's up there, yeah. Who? Apple's up there. Which one? Yeah, there's a number of religious symbols there. Let's start on the top left. Anyone know what that is? Oh, no, okay, so Superman, okay, and then on the top, the next one over? Yeah, I don't know what that is actually. It might be a Christian cross, but usually the Christian cross is, the cross is higher up, right? What's that? Yeah, it should be longer. I'm actually not sure what that one is. What about the one beside it? Yeah, that's the Star of David, right? So you'll find it on the Israeli flag. It's a symbol of the Jewish people. What about the next one? That's the symbol for Om, right? So I think it's used by Buddhists sometimes. I think. What about the one beside it? I'm not really sure what that one is either. Actually, I've never gone through these with students in like a sequential fashion. So now I'm looking, I'm like, I've never even seen that one before, but it's been on that slide for a long time. We've got Superman. What about the one beside Superman? Yeah, it's a symbol for Muslims, right? So you'll find that on the flag for Pakistan and in a number of other places. What about the one beside that? That's a Greek symbol, I think. And I think it's the symbol for like Mother Earth or the Earth goddess, but don't quote me on that. I could be wrong. What about the one beside it? Yeah, the yin and yang, right? So Taoists, I think, or Taoists use the yin and yang. What about beside it? What's that? I can just barely hear you. Oh, the temple. Yeah, it is a temple, but what does it symbolize? Don't know. I think it's a Japanese Shinto shrine. I think, and so it's a Japanese symbol representing that. I think. What about that one? What's that? The scout thing. Well, maybe. Yeah, I wonder why the scouts use it. Does anyone recognize it from anywhere else? It's what? Yeah, maybe. I thought it was a lily. I thought it was a fleur de lis, and so you'll find it on the French flag, and you'll also see it used in Quebec quite a bit. But it's got other uses as well. Yeah, with the Scouts and others. Yeah. What about the one on the far bottom left there? It's what? Yeah, pharmacy and the medical profession uses that symbol quite a bit. That's an old Greek thing, I think. I think it has to do with Hermes and with Asclepius, I think, but maybe we'll go into that later. What's the one beside it on the top? Looks like looks like you're steering an old-timey sailing ship, right? That might be the wheel of Ahsoka, but I'm not sure about that. We'll come to Ahsoka later, or Ashoka, sorry. We'll come to Ashoka a little bit later. What about the one beside that? No? Symbol for Sikhs. The religious group from India. There's Target, of course, and Nike, and the swastika, McDonald's, and Apple. Those last two, do you know what the one on the left is? Yeah, that's a lotus flower. And then what about the last one? With the little bio. Yeah, it's a biohazard. So yeah, if you see that, don't touch it, please. It's bad news. So lots of different symbols here, right? But this, of course, is only the tip of the iceberg, right? Because humans communicate in symbols all day, all day, all day long, right? What am I doing right now? Not now, but what have I been doing for the past 40 minutes? I've been speaking to you, right? And so every word that comes out of my mouth is a symbol, right? When I say table, that's just a bunch of sounds that I've put together, but what do those sounds symbolize? This thing right here, right? You know that when I say that, it's a symbol for that thing, right? So here I am with, audible symbols coming out of my mouth, and you are sitting there decoding those symbols. At least I hope so, right? So all day, here I am, projecting symbols at you, and here you are interpreting them and projecting them back to me, right? Why do you choose the clothes that you do? What makes you, when you go to the clothing store, whatever clothing store you go to, what makes you pick up something and buy it? Because it looks nice on you, right? Good. What else? And what? Interest? Like you're interested in it? Okay. Why are you interested in it? Okay. Yeah, who here chooses their clothes based on the brand? Like you would buy some brands and you wouldn't buy others. Yeah? No? Doesn't matter? Just you judge clothes based on what they are, you don't look at the label? Yeah? It's either you like it or you don't. Brand doesn't matter. Okay. So but for some of us, brand does matter, right? And the way it looks on us matters as well. What about the style? Right? Are there some styles that you would wear and wouldn't wear? What? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and the reason why, how much it costs, of course, is a practical concern. Does it actually fit is another concern, right? If you can't get the pants on, you're not going to buy them. But in a lot of cases, we choose clothes because what? You need it. Yeah. But we choose clothes because of what they say about you, right? We dress it in certain ways because those clothes become a representation of us, right? They become symbols of us. We want people to see us a certain way, and so the clothes help present us that way, right? They're symbols. If I come in here wearing a suit, I'm communicating a certain message to you, right? If I come in here wearing jeans and a t-shirt and Chuck Taylor's here, that's a totally different symbol, right? I'm projecting a different kind of image to you, right? And again, some of us are very conscious about the clothes we choose because we're trying to create a certain look, right? We're trying to communicate something specific to other people. Some of us aren't that picky, right? But our clothes can be symbolic of who we are, right? And they help us to communicate that to other people, right? What about this? Everybody okay? Everybody good? Yeah. That's a symbol, right? This is a symbol for okay, right? Everything okay, everything good. Of course, in other parts of the world, it doesn't mean okay, it means something different, right?
Israel.
So, what's that?
Israel, like culture.
Yeah, right? So, depending on what culture you go to, that can have a different meaning, right? Same thing with this. This can be. Here in North America, that means okay, right? Are you okay? In other parts of the world,
No.
it's a particular part of your anatomy, right? Which we don't have to go into. But yeah, because this or whatever, or the middle finger, which I won't do, all of those are symbols, right? And the only reason they're symbols is because they are given meaning by the culture, right? And again, sometimes the symbol is the same, but the meaning differs, right? But that's the same with all these other symbols too, is that they not only symbolize something, but there are other things attached to those symbols. So let's look at Superman, for instance, right? I think most of us recognize that as the Superman symbol, right? He's a cartoon character or a film character sometimes. He wears that on his chest, right? And so the symbol represents Superman, but what else does the symbol represent? What? Authority? Okay, yeah. What else? Oh, sorry, what does it represent?
The first letter of Superman.
Oh, right. They say that in one of the movies, right? It's of his family name or something. Yeah, there's an explanation for it, right, in the movie. Yeah, what else does the symbol represent to us, though?
Hero.
Yeah, heroism, right? Superman is a hero, right? What kind of stuff, what do we know about Superman and the things that he does? Yeah, he helps people, right? He helps people. What else does he do? Or what else is he? What else is he? He can fly, yeah. That's pretty cool, right? He's very strong, right? What else?
Gentleman.
He's what?
A gentleman.
He's generally portrayed as a very, very polite, a very polite person, right? A very gentlemanly kind of guy. What else do we know about him? Very powerful, yeah. He's basically indestructible, right? You can hit him or stab him or shoot at him and stuff just bounces off, right? So he's, what's that?
Right.
Yeah, brave, resilient, right? All of these kind of good qualities. And so that's the other thing about symbols, is that when we see a symbol like Superman, right, we certainly think of the character, right? We see it and we think, oh yeah, that's Superman. But connected to Superman is all of those other meanings and feelings, right? The idea of someone who's brave, someone who's strong, someone who is good, right? And polite and helps people who need help, right? All of those ideas are kind of tied into that symbol. And so when we see that symbol, we associate it with Superman, but we also associate it with all of those other things, right? And the religious, well, maybe the religious symbols not aside. I was gonna put them in a different category, but maybe I won't. Both the religious symbols and the corporate symbols that are up here are trying to do the same thing, right? When you see Apple, when you see the Apple logo, Apple wants you to say, oh yeah, okay, that's Apple. But they also want you to think certain things about Apple, right? They want you to feel a certain way when you see that logo, right? And so what you think and, whether you do feel those things, I don't know. But really, that's what religions and corporate logos are trying to do. They're trying to get you to feel a certain way about that symbol. Just like with how Superman, we feel certain things about him, right? And the sort of personal qualities that are attached to that symbol. That makes sense? Yeah. So, again, humans use symbols all the time in culture, right? And again, sometimes they're visual, sometimes they're sound-based, sometimes we're using our, hands to gesture to each other. There's all kinds of ways in which we can communicate with each other in a symbolic manner, right? And symbols are basically just one thing standing in for the other, right? And so, again, the figure of Jesus, for example, the figure of Jesus as a shepherd, that shepherd metaphor symbolizes the relationship between Jesus and his followers, right? And so, yeah, we do this all the time. Lots and lots of symbols. Okie dokie, you want to take a quick break before we go on to the next one? Okay. Break time. I'll see you in 10 minutes. And then we'll talk about how culture is learned, I think. Yeah, learned. Okay, and we are back. So, one of the things we said about culture is that it is symbolic, right? And so, culture is full of all kinds of symbolic meanings that humans use to communicate with each other, right? And so, again, whenever we write, whenever we speak, even whenever we get dressed in the morning or do our hair a certain way or, you know, tattoo our skin or whatever we're doing, we're symbolically communicating with the outside world, right? We're symbolically communicating with other humans, trying to tell them something about ourselves, right? Let me give you maybe a more anthropological example of symbolic culture, okay? So you're probably looking at this and wondering if it was a spelling mistake or if I just like, you know, yeah, randomly typed. Actually, it's probably more closely like an autocorrect on my text because I'm not a very good text typer, so sometimes I get all sorts of weird things. But in fact, what this is the name of an indigenous group that lives here in British Columbia, and they're called the Quakuaku. Okay, and they are again a First Nations group. They've lived here for thousands of years. They still live here. This is an older photograph, right? This photograph is probably from the late 1890s or so it's quite old. If you see a Kokuaku person nowadays, they won't dress like this. They'll dress like you and me, of course. And they come from a part of BC just a little bit up the coast. So you can see the Quakuaku territory there in green. They have kind of the top part of Vancouver Island, but also a little bit of the mainland as well. That's traditionally where they've lived, okay? While we're here, I want to just take a minute and point out how many different cultures there were and are just in British Columbia alone, right? So we often think of First Nations people as like one group, right? There's just First Nations people. But actually, First Nations people are made up of many different cultural groups. And here in British Columbia, you can see, I don't know, probably a good 12 or 13 just within this part of BC, never mind the rest of Canada, and never mind the rest of the United States, and never mind the rest of South America, right? So there's huge numbers of indigenous cultures. Each one is, you know, similar to the others, but also its own unique thing, right? So again, the Kokuaku are a First Nations group here from Canada, but they're one of many, right? And so each of these groups will have its own distinct culture, its own language, its own special religious or spiritual beliefs, their own way of getting food, their own way of dressing and building shelters. All of that will be unique to those groups, which is pretty amazing, I think. The Quakuaku here traditionally, not so much anymore, but used to live in villages that looked like this. And so they'd build these huge houses out of cedar trees. Each house there'd be multiple families living in each house. And as you can see, they would paint the front of the houses with designs, sometimes meant to represent the family that was kind of in charge of the house. You can see they've got some boats down there in the front. Again, this is an old photograph, maybe early 1900s or so is when this photograph comes from, I think anyway. This is maybe a little bit easier to see. This is a museum exhibit, but you can see kind of what a Quakuaku village might have looked like with their big wooden houses that they've painted. Those totem poles you see in the front, which you've probably seen around Vancouver in a few places. And then you can see kind of a model of a Quakuaku family here, just by the beach, getting some salmon ready to cook. They've got their little baby kind of wrapped up with them. Right. So, Quakuaku people are a First Nations group from this part of the world. Traditionally, they would have been hunter-gatherers, so they wouldn't have done any farming at all. They wouldn't have kept any animals. They would have gotten all their food by hunting or fishing or just gathering it from the environment. Okay? And in terms of culture being symbolic, one of the important symbols in Kokuaku culture is hunger. Okay? And again, that's probably going to sound strange, and it's probably not going to make a lot of sense, but I'm going to help you make sense of this, okay? Now, first of all, let me show you some of their artwork. And so here we have, and I'm not sure how well you can see it because it's getting pretty bright in here. Actually, I'm just gonna put these down. Just a bit. Sorry if you're working on your tan there. That doesn't do a lot. Okay. So here we have some Kokuaku masks. Okay, and so these masks are kind of artwork, but they would have been made to actually be used. And so in Kokuaku ritual, people would put these masks on. They would sometimes have costumes or robes to go over top. And then they would do certain kinds of dances. And maybe a little bit later I can show you some video of how that looks. But for now, this is the masks that, some of the types of masks that you see. They're fantastically carved. The skill here is pretty amazing. If you like this sort of thing, the Museum of Anthropology on the UBC campus has lots and lots of this kind of stuff. And so, yeah, it's worth the trip. It's great. The thing I want to point out to you here, though, is that if you look at all these masks, there's a lot of emphasis on the mouth and the teeth, right? So this bird here, I'm not sure what kind of bird it is on the top left, but it's got a really big mouth. In the top right, I think this is a wolf. Obviously, it's very stylized, but there's a wolf with lots of teeth. The bottom left, that's a bear, right? So the bear's got big teeth, big canine teeth there. And in the lower right, that's a wild man mask. And so lots of indigenous people have stories about a wild man of the woods that, if you get lost in the woods, this thing will find you and eat you, which is a little creepy. But the masks themselves, again, show a lot of focus on the mouth and the teeth. And indeed, if you look at some of the kind of mythical stories of the Kokuaku people, you'll hear about lots of things eaten and eating and being eaten. Okay, so there's lots of this kind of eating and teeth and hunger kind of mixed into what we see from Kokuaku people. Now, I want to press pause on the Kokuaku. I'm going to come back to them in just a few minutes, okay? The second part of, or the second characteristic of culture is that it is a learned thing. And we've already kind of mentioned this. We know that people aren't born with culture, right? Culture has to be taught, right? It has to be downloaded to us. And so this term here, enculturation, is that process, the process of downloading culture into our hardware, right? The process of learning it. Now, sometimes that instruction is very direct, right? So we can probably all think of examples from our past, maybe when we were younger, when our parents or our caregivers or our grandparents or people around us taught us things about our culture, right? This is what we believe, right? This is the right way to behave. These kind of things are right and these kind of things are wrong. This is how you should speak to your elders, right? This is how we prepare food. This is how we eat that food and we don't chew with our mouths open or whatever. We can all think of times when people have directly taught us cultural lessons, right? But in some ways, what's even more interesting is the implicit ways that we're taught culture. So the ways that we're taught cultural lessons when we're not even paying attention. Okay? So let me give you an example of this. We know what this is, yes? Yeah? Anyone play chess? Yeah? No? No? Yeah? Is anyone good? Victoria, you're okay? So. I know how to play. I taught my dad to play chess. This was years ago. I taught him how to play, and I taught him, and the second game we played, he beat me. So either I'm a horrible chess player, or I'm an excellent teacher. One of the two. We'll see. It's pretty embarrassing, actually. But if you know this game, you'll know that the sort of both sides face off against each other. You can, if you move in the right way, you can take pieces from the other person. And what's kind of the goal of this game? To what? Yeah, to get to the king, right? So the king is the tall guy in the back with the little round pointy things around his crown, basically, right? You want to capture or be in the position to capture the other team's king, and then you will win, right? Then it's checkmate, as they say. Now, most of us looking at this would say, oh yeah, okay, it's chess, it's a game, people play it, whatever, right? I like it or I don't like it. But if we look at this through the eyes of an anthropologist, we might see something a little bit different. We might see some cultural lessons worked into this. Okay, so see what you think about this. The first thing an anthropologist might say is, okay, well, you've just told me the goal of this game is to capture the other team or the other person's king, right? And in doing so, you will win and the other person will lose, right? Is it possible to tie in chess? Yeah, I think I've heard that too. You can get in a situation where neither can move, but it's very rare, right? It almost never happens. So you might say, well, okay, whatever. But again, that's an important lesson, right? The idea that winning is actually important, right? Sometimes winning is not important. If you go to some cultures, they will play a game, maybe they'll play like a football game, and the game is not over when somebody wins. The game is over when the elders feel that the score is tied, and then the game is over, right? So they have a cultural value of equality, right? They want both sides to be equal, and then the game can conclude, right? But here, that's not the value at all. The value is winning, right? You want to beat the other player, right? That's the whole point. And so again, there's a cultural value of triumph, of winning, of defeating the enemy, right? Now, the other thing that's kind of maybe interesting about the chess game is that it's kind of symbolic of something. Like, what is it symbolic of? Or what is it almost a metaphor for? Yeah, it's almost a metaphor for war, right? And once upon a time, this is how armies would fight, right? They would line up on the field across from each other, and then there'd be some impassioned speeches, and then everyone would hold up their swords and yell at each other, and then they'd charge and hack each other to bits, right? And whoever was left standing, that's who won, right? And this game is kind of like that idea, but in slow motion, right? It happens very slowly. The two armies converge on each other. Certain people die, right? Certain pieces are captured. And then eventually one army will make it to the king and sort of kill him. And then once you do, you have won the battle, right? You've won the game. So yeah, this game is a little bit of a metaphor for war, That's interesting. Let's see, what else do we have? Okay, we have a bunch of different pieces, right? And what are some of these pieces called? What's their name? No, you don't know okay, that's fair. So if we look at the white pieces right along the lower row of white pieces, we have pawns or soldiers, depending on where you come from, or might be another word. What do they call them in Italy? No, the row, the lower row there. They're what? Okay, what does that mean? Oh, okay. Like citizens or civilians or something? Okay, interesting. All right, so we've got a bunch of pawns or just regular people out front or soldiers. Then in the back, if we go to the back left, we'll see that we have a rook or a castle or sometimes an elephant. I think in India it's an elephant. Or maybe the horse is, I forget. Okay, anyway. There's a little castle there. There's a knight next to it, right? The little horsey guy is a knight. Then we have the queen with the little cross on her head. We have the king beside him. Oh, sorry, and I missed the guy with the ice cream cone on his head. That's a bishop, right? Or sometimes maybe he's the elephant in India, I forget. Anyway, we have these pieces, and they're all kind of symbolically different parts of society, right? We have the regular people, and then we have kind of the aristocracy, right? The people who have higher status, the knights and the bishops and the kings and queens. I don't know what the castle's supposed to be. Maybe it's just a castle. Who knows? So that's interesting. So we have kind of a metaphor for society on each side. Now, does anyone know how these pieces can move? Yeah? How do the pawns move, Victoria? Right. So the pawns can only move one space at a time, right? So they just go one step forward, one step forward. Can they move sideways? No. Yeah, to take another piece they can, right? But normally they just go straight forward, right? What about the rook? What about the castle? Yeah, straight lines, right? They can only move in straight lines. What about the knight, the little horse? Yeah, they move in a little L, right? 2 squares and then 3 squares, or 3 squares and then 2, right? What about the bishop? Diagonally, right? Good. What about the queen? Yeah, so she can move in any direction, any number of squares, right? But as long as it's straight. She can't go around corners or anything, but she can go diagonally or she can go straight line, right? And then the king, what about the king? What's that? Yeah, so he can move any direction, but only 1 square at a time, right? Okay. So that's pretty interesting too, right? Because what does that suggest? Well, it's so interesting, isn't it, how the people who are higher up in society have all of these options, right? They can go all kinds of places, they can do all kinds of things, and yet the regular people, what can they do? They just march forward, right? One square at a time, to their death, usually, right? Because if you're playing chess and your opponent is in a position and they can take either your pawn or they can take your knight, which one do you want them to take? Yeah, you're going to sacrifice the regular people, right? The regular, normal little people, right? So the game's doing a few things here, right? The game is kind of normalizing war as a, way to solve conflicts, right? It's normalizing the fact that, people higher in society just naturally have more options and more things they can do, and us little people don't have that many options. And it's normalizing the idea that either the regular people should die to protect the people on top, or that it's okay for the people on top to sacrifice the little people in order to win the battle, right? Yeah, and again, you might say, well, yeah, but it's just a game. None of that is explicitly stated. But keep in mind that games like this would have come out of societies where all of those things were true, right? Where there was lots of warfare, where the little people were kind of sacrificed on the battlefield to protect the king and to protect the queen, right? We still see that idea in, even in characters like James Bond, right? There's a new James Bond movie coming out eventually at some point. And what's James Bond's function? Basically to sacrifice himself for queen and country, right? That's his job. He's cool as anything, right? But he's one of the pawns, right? And he's out there risking his life to protect the queen, right? So again, these lessons kind of come out of, these games kind of come out of cultures in which these things are true, and then they help reinforce that idea, right? You learn a lesson and then it's reinforced by other things in your culture. And even sometimes things just as simple as a chess game, right? You're playing the game, you're having fun, you're trying to beat the other person. It's, you have a good time until you lose, and then you're, annoyed. But you're learning cultural lessons at the same time, right? And that's kind of how culture helps to teach, right? We get taught directly, but then those things are reinforced, right? Those lessons are reinforced. Okay. Does that make some sort of sense? Some sort of sense? Can I give you another example of this? Right. I have two more examples for you. This is one of them. Let's go back to Quakuaku people. Okay. So this is another old photograph. It's probably taken right before a ritual or a celebration during the kind of the winter months. And so in the winter months, that's when Kokuaku people come back together. They live in big villages together. And that's when they do all of their ceremonies, their rituals. People get married because everybody has kind of come back together after they've spread out for the summer. They collect back together. So lots of ceremonies, lots of feasting, lots of marriages. That all happens during the winter months. And one of the things that you might see, well, not anymore, but you might have seen, is a ritual by the Cannibal bird society adding a new member into the group. And so the Cannibal bird society is kind of a secret society. And you may have heard the term secret society before. In anthropology, it just means a group of people who have kind of a specific body of like ritual knowledge, right? So you'll see these in really all kinds of different cultures and ancient cultures. People who worship certain gods are in a sort of a secret society or a cult, and they don't tell anyone else how to pray to their god unless you join the cult or join the secret society. And so here the Kokuaku have them too, and sometimes they need to add a new member into their group. And I'm going to explain this ritual to you, and then we'll talk about the symbols in it, okay? So here you can see some of the members of the Cannibal Bird Society. A cannibal bird is like a mythical bird that eats human beings. It's very terrifying. They're the ones with the really long beaks. And so what I'm going to ask you to do is to imagine this, okay? So we're all going to put on our Tony Stark Avengers space-time GPS things from it's Endgame, right? Where he develops those? Yeah, it's Endgame. We're all going to put those on, and we're going to go back, let's see. Let's go back 1,000 years, okay? So we go back 1,000 years to this part of the world. There are no white people here, right? There are no cities, there are no roads, there's nothing, right? There's just wilderness, and there's villages in which the Kokuaku people live, okay? So we've gone back in time about 1,000 years. We're going to join a winter ceremonial. We're going to go into one of those big houses. We're going to go near the back where they'll have a big fire going, and we're going to sit down by the fire and just kind of watch and see what we see, okay? So we might see some people eating. We might see some people doing some ritual dances, wearing masks and things like that. And then we're going to see a ritual in which the Cannibal Bird Society will induct a new member, okay? So picture this, if you will, all right? We're all sitting in this house together. We're sitting by the fire. It's nice and warm. Maybe we've got a blanket on because it is winter, so it might be kind of cool. And through the front door, in runs a young man, okay? He is totally naked. He's got mud all over him and like sticks and moss in his hair, and he is acting like a savage animal, okay? He's running around on all fours. He's trying to bite people. He's succeeding in biting people, scratching them. He's acting wild, right? So the people fight him off, right? They use sticks and whatever they can to hit him and drive him back out into the woods, which they do. Okay, so commotion settles, everyone kind of settles down after a little while. And then the same thing happens again. This young man comes running in, naked, covered in mud and dirt, acting like a wild animal, and he is kicked out of the house again into the woods, okay? But this time, the people leave right by the edge of the trees. They leave a small little dish of food, okay? Maybe some dried berries or some salmon or something like that. And the young man creeps forward and grabs the food and goes back into the woods. After a little while, he comes running back in again, okay? Again, still naked, still wild, clawing at everyone. People kick him out of the house again, and maybe this time they leave a blanket by the trees, by the edge of the trees. And so after a while, the young man will come forward and take the blanket and disappear again. And then after a while, he comes running in again, okay? And this happens a number of times, but each time he comes running in, he's a little less wild, okay? He's a little less savage. And every time he is kicked out, the people leave something for him by the trees, something from the human world, right? A blanket, human food, maybe some boots for his feet, right? Things like that. And so, again, this happens a few times, and then eventually the young man will come in a final time, and he'll just come in quietly with his blanket and just sit by the fire, right? And at that point, the Cannibal Bird Society members will take him, they'll go off and they'll have kind of a private dinner, and he will be kind of brought into the Cannibal Bird Society, okay? Now for us, I'm gonna have to wrap this up quickly. For us, we might be kind of looking at each other saying, well, that was bizarre, right? Is that not a bizarre ritual? Yeah, right? We've all been to rituals, like cultural rituals or religious rituals. Victoria, you've been to church, right? I don't remember anything like that, do you? I don't remember anything like that, do you? No. That's a bizarre ritual, right? But the problem, or not the problem, the reason why it's bizarre, of course, is that we don't really understand the symbols, right? We don't really understand the meaning behind what's happening. And so without the meaning, it seems chaotic and strange, right? But let me give you some context. So I mentioned the Quakuaku people are hunters and gatherers, right? They grow no food, they keep no animals, they collect all their food from the natural world. And what the Quakuaku do is that their strategy is that they, in the summer months, they collect as much food as they possibly can, and then they store it away for the winter. So they collect berries and then they dry out the berries. They collect fish oil and they store away the fish oil. They collect salmon and they dry out the salmon and store that away. And so even though they still hunt and fish and gather in the winter, there's a lot less food available. So they've really got to rely on the food that they have put away. Right? So as you can imagine, you need to be careful about how much you eat through the winter months, right? You can't just, in December go and pig out and eat all of your food, because then in February you're gonna starve, right? You won't have any food left. And so what do the Quakuaku have to do? Well, they have to conquer their hunger, right? They have to be in charge of it, right? They can't let their hunger run their lives, right? Because then they'll just eat all their food and then there'll be none left and they'll starve. So they have to be very careful. They have to control that hunger. They have to control that urge to eat. Hello? They have to control that urge to eat. And they do that, every Kokuaku person has to learn to do that. But the control of that hunger actually is a metaphor, right? And for them, it's a metaphor for maintaining social harmony, right? So the idea here is that yes, the Quakuaku have hunger inside them, right? They're hungry for food, and sometimes they have to control it, just like we all do. But also, like we all do, we all have things inside us that if we let them out, or if we let them control us, then it can be damaging to other people, right? We all have anger, or greed, or jealousy, or spitefulness, or whatever it is. And if we let those things out, then it's damaging to the community, right? It damages other people. And so just like the Quakuaku have to control their hunger at certain times of the year, they also have to control those negative things inside us, right? That can come out and can hurt other people, right? And so how do we do it? Well, we do it the same way as the ritual showed us just now, right? What did that ritual represent? This wild, savage thing, right? All of these negative things coming out, trying to hurt people, right? And what did they do? They did the ritual, right? They shared with that person, right? They drove him out of the house, but then they offered him something, right? And really what they were doing is trying to bring him back in, right? And finally, it worked, right? That ritual and that sort of consistent sharing worked, and they were able to bring that person back in and tame him, right? Just like they're able to tame their hunger, right? And just like they're able to tame all those negative things that are inside all of us that, can come out if we're not careful, right? And so I'll show you. Oh yeah, little dance there. So there's a lot of text here, but I'll just read part of it to you. So the Hamatsa is the young man. That's the title for the young man. So the Hamatsa's hunger is fearsome, but it's the same hunger felt by every human, and thus every human has the power to control it. Ultimately, the Hamatsa and the ferocity that he embodies can be conquered, right? Morally, the force of controlled social action, the strength of ritual, can conquer even the cannibal's hunger. So here, the winter ceremonials prove that no matter how terrible the power of hunger, no matter how many fearsome guises it assumes, no matter how many masks it wears, or how many voices it speaks with, morality will always be the ultimate victor. So long as humans have the knowledge to use food correctly, they never need to fear hunger, nor its awful accompaniment, death. Right? So here you can see a lot of layers of symbol and metaphor, right? Their storage of food and the fact that they have to control their hunger in order to not eat it all, but also, this sort of maintaining of social harmony by controlling negative things within ourselves, right? And we see that idea played out in the ritual, right? The ritual is basically the acting out of the taming of hunger, right? If you could take that process out, it's an internal process, right? You're hungry, but you don't want to pig out on, all the food in your fridge. That internal process is played out in front of everyone with characters, right? With this wild young man, right? And so, again, when we use our little Tony Stark space-time GPS and we go back and see things like this, we might think, wow, that's really strange. What was that all about, right? But for the Kokuaku, they've been enculturated, right? They know the symbols. They know their cultural values. And so when they see something like this, they're like, yep, I get that. I know what that means, right? I understand what's being communicated. And it all has to do with symbols, right? And it has to do with how these people have learned the sort of cultural symbols and cultural meanings that are specific to them. Whew, interesting. I know that was kind of a lot, but are there any questions about that, or are there things that you would like to ask or say?
So you say they control their food. So they need to control how they eat their food because their food is inside. So do they control their food? They try to not make there are so many new babies or so many people eating their food.
Actually, that's an interesting point, Kenny. The question is, do they kind of control their numbers, right? Because if you need to control your food and your population is exploding, yeah, you're going to run out of food. I think we will talk about this later, but what you may find is that most hunter-gatherers are pretty careful about their population numbers because nature will really only provide you with so much food. And so if your population goes above it, you're going to be in trouble, right? And so often what hunter-gatherer mothers do is they actually breastfeed their children for quite a long time. Here in the West, we wean our kids, so we move them onto solid food pretty early, right? I think it's even within a year we start them on solid food. Hunter-gatherer people will generally do that as well, but mothers will continue to breastfeed their kids for sometimes 2 or 3 years. And while that's happening, while women are breastfeeding, their body is releasing hormones that make it less likely that they will get pregnant again, right? So the body is kind of saying, well, we still have one baby, let's not make another one yet, right? And so again, it's not 100% foolproof. Sometimes women get pregnant anyway, but it helps to space out their births. And so hunter-gatherer women will generally have a kid every 3 or 4 years. But it's also worth pointing out that, in the past, infant mortality was quite a bit higher. And so a lot of those children that were born would probably die before the age of 2 because there's really no, there's no medical care, there's no antibiotics, nothing like that. But you're very right that hunter-gatherer groups tend to be very careful with their numbers because they can't just let their populations explode. Otherwise, they'll run out of food. There's more to that story, but I'll leave it there for now. But it's a good point. Anything else you would like to say before I turn you loose for lunch? You've controlled your hunger for long enough. Okay, then that is all for today. Pack it up. I'll see you tomorrow when we'll have Friday. Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about culture, and then I think next week we'll be ready to move on. But until then, I'll see you tomorrow, okay?